It was a quiet afternoon when he pulled up his old van in front of the house. The place looked like any other suburban home. Clean yard, a tidy garden, and a garage with the door half open. He had been called to repair a broken garage light, and to him, it was just another job, the kind of job he did every day without thinking too much about it. For him, work was about fixing things, earning his pay, and moving on to the next call. Carrying his small toolbox, he walked toward the garage. The woman who had called for the repair stepped outside. She looked well-dressed, her hair carefully done, as if she had been preparing for something important. She greeted him politely, with a smile that seemed friendly, yet slightly curious. He nodded back, keeping things professional, the way he always did. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she said, leading him to the light fixture above the garage. He replied with a simple, "No problem, let me check it out," and got to work. As he set up his small ladder and reached for the bulb, he noticed the wiring was old. It wasn't going to be a quick job. He would need to check the entire line to see why the light kept failing. He explained this to her briefly, and she agreed without hesitation, telling him to take his time. The garage was quiet, except for the sound of his tools clicking and the occasional spark from the old wires. He was focused on the task, his hands moving with practiced ease. Years of doing this kind of work had made him confident in his skills. For him, every repair was like solving a small puzzle. The woman stood nearby, watching him closely. At first, he thought nothing of it. Many clients stood around to see what he was doing. But soon, he noticed that she wasn't just watching his work. She seemed to be observing him. The silence stretched on until she suddenly broke it with words he wasn't expecting. "You're handsome, you know that?" The words hit him like a surprise gust of wind. His hand froze for a moment before he quickly regained his composure and continued adjusting the wires. He wasn't used to hearing such direct compliments from clients. He gave a small laugh, unsure of how to respond. "Well, I guess that's not something I hear on the job every day," he said lightly, trying to keep the mood casual. She chuckled softly, as if amused by his reaction. "I just thought I should say it. Not everyone notices the people who come around to fix things, but I notice." Her tone wasn't flirty in a loud way. It was calm, almost thoughtful. He couldn't help but feel a little unsettled, not because it was unpleasant, but because it was so unexpected. He kept his focus on the light, carefully reconnecting wires, but in the back of his mind, her words lingered. He had come to fix a broken bulb, not to receive compliments. Yet there he was, wondering what had made her say that. The job took longer than he thought. The wiring behind the garage wall had issues, and he needed to trace it carefully. As he worked, she continued to stand nearby, occasionally asking small questions. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" she asked. "Over 10 years, he replied, tightening a screw. "Started out helping a friend, then picked it up full-time. Been busy ever since." She nodded. "That explains why you look so comfortable with it, like you know exactly what you're doing." He smiled faintly, but didn't look at her directly. He preferred to keep his focus on the job. Still, he couldn't deny that the conversation, light as it was, made the atmosphere different from most jobs he had done. Usually, clients either stayed inside or only came out to ask if he needed water or coffee. Rarely did anyone spend this much time standing nearby, engaging him in conversation. As he finished reconnecting the main wire, he climbed down the ladder, wiped his hands on a rag, and flipped the switch. The garage light flickered for a second before glowing steadily. The once dark corner was now filled with a warm glow. "There you go," he said, satisfied with the result. She looked up at the light, then back at him. "Perfect. You really know your stuff." He nodded, ready to pack up his tools. But before he could, she spoke again, her voice carrying that same mix of warmth and curiosity. "You must meet a lot of people in this job, don't you?" "Yeah, all kinds," he replied. "Every house is different. Every problem's different too. Keeps it interesting." "And do they ever stop to notice you? I mean, the person behind the toolbox?" she asked. He paused at that question. It wasn't something he had thought about much. To most people, he was just the repair guy who showed up, fixed what was broken, and left. They didn't see him beyond that role. "Not really," he admitted. Most just want the problem solved, which is fine. That's my job. She gave him a thoughtful look. Well, I think it's important to notice people. Everyone has a story, right? He didn't reply restrained. The following week, his routine carried on as usual. Work calls, house visits, small repairs, it was all familiar ground. Yet every time he opened his toolbox or set up his ladder, his mind drifted back to that afternoon at the house with the garage light. He remembered her words, not just the compliment, but the way she said them, as if she had been looking past the surface and seeing more than just a man doing a job. It was unusual for him, because in his line of work, people rarely looked deeper. They cared about the broken bulb, the leaky pipe, or the faulty switch, but never about the person fixing it. Still, he told himself it was nothing, just a passing moment, something kind she said out of politeness or impulse. But the truth was, the memory stayed with him. A few days later, he got another call. This time, it was the same house. When he looked at the address on his phone, he paused. For a brief second, he considered whether to take it or pass it along to someone else. But then he shook his head. Work was work, and this was no different. When he arrived, she greeted him with the same warm smile as before. Looks like my garage isn't the only thing giving me trouble. Now the kitchen light has started acting up. He followed her inside, toolbox in hand. The house felt cozy, lived in, with family pictures on the walls and a faint smell of freshly brewed coffee. The kitchen light flickered weakly when she turned it on, buzzing faintly before dimming out. Old wiring again, he said, examining the switch. I'll need to replace this one, maybe even check the circuit. Take all the time you need, she replied, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table as if she had been expecting him to stay a while. He set to work, unscrewing the cover and testing the wires. She stayed nearby, pouring herself a cup of coffee. After a moment, she asked, "Would you like one too?" He usually said no when clients offered, but this time, he hesitated and then nodded. "Sure, thank you." She handed him a mug, and for a few seconds, they both stood there, the soft smell of coffee filling the room. He took a sip, then set it aside, returning to the wires. "You always look so focused when you work," she said, leaning on the counter. "It's like nothing else exists around you." He gave a small laugh. "Well, when you're dealing with electricity, focus is important. One wrong move, and you'll regret it." She smiled. "True, but I think it's more than that. You seem like someone who puts his heart into what he does." Her words caught him off guard again. He wasn't used to being read like that. To him, fixing lights and wiring was just a job, something he did well because it paid the bills. Yet hearing her say it made him wonder if there really was something deeper about the way he worked. They fell into easy conversation as he replaced the old switch and tightened the wires. She asked about his work, his background, what got him into repairs in the first place. He answered honestly but simply, keeping the focus on the job while sharing bits of his life. When he finished, the kitchen light turned on smoothly, shining bright without a flicker. She clapped lightly, almost like a child. "Perfect again. You've saved me twice now." He chuckled, putting away his tools. "Just doing my job." But before he could leave, she said something that made him pause. "You know, most people just come, fix what's broken, and rush out the door. But with you, it feels different, like you bring a kind of calm with you." He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded, thanking her for the coffee before heading back to his van. On the drive home, the same feeling returned, that sense that this wasn't just another job. There was something about the way she spoke to him, the way she noticed details others ignored. He told himself not to think too much of it. She was just a client after all. But his mind didn't let it go so easily. The next week, another call came. This time it wasn't a repair. She simply wanted him to check if her outdoor wiring was safe, since the neighborhood had been having issues with power outages. He agreed, though he suspected she could have called anyone else for something so minor. When he arrived, she greeted him warmly, as if they were old friends. They walked around the yard as he inspected the wires, and she asked him small questions about his life. Did he enjoy what he did? Did he ever think about doing something else? What made him happiest outside of work? At first, he gave short, practical answers, but slowly, he found himself sharing more than he normally would. There was something about her presence that made it easy to open up, even about things he rarely said aloud. She listened intently, nodding thoughtfully, as if every word mattered. And once again, she slipped in a comment that caught him off guard. You know, you're not just good at fixing things. You have a way of making people feel comfortable. When he arrived at her house that day, something felt different right away. It wasn't about a broken switch or a flickering light this time. She greeted him at the door with a softness in her eyes, as though she had been waiting for him, not just for his help, but for his presence. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. "It's not really a repair I need this time. It's more like something I want to show you." He felt a small flicker of curiosity. Usually his work was straightforward: fix the problem, collect the payment, and leave. But the way she spoke now made him feel that this visit was going to be different. She led him through the hallway into the living room, where a few old photo albums were stacked on the table. The curtains were open, letting in soft daylight that made the room look warm and calm. "Sometimes," she began, sitting down on the sofa, "things break in life. Not just lights or wires, but people too. And when that happens, it's harder to repair than anything else." He stood for a moment, unsure of whether to sit or stay where he was. After a pause, he sat down across from her, listening quietly. She opened one of the albums and pointed to a picture of herself from years ago, standing with family, her smile wide and carefree. "That was me before life got complicated," she said softly. "Before I felt like I was carrying everything alone." Her honesty surprised him. He wasn't used to clients sharing such personal things, but instead of feeling awkward, he found himself leaning in, as though drawn into her story. "You remind me of something I've missed," she continued. "A sense of calm, a feeling that someone is really listening." He didn't know what to say. Words didn't come easily in moments like this, but maybe silence was enough, just sitting there, being present. After a while, she closed the album and smiled gently. "Thank you for coming today. I know it's not your usual kind of call, but I needed to talk to someone, and you seemed like the right person." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes, listening is as important as fixing things." She looked at him, her eyes holding his for a little longer than before, and for the first time, he realized this connection was moving beyond simple kindness. The days that followed carried a shift in his routine. Whenever his phone buzzed with a new message, part of him hoped it was her, and when it was, he found himself saying yes to her requests without hesitation. Sometimes she called him for help with small things, a loose doorknob, a window that wouldn't shut properly. Other times, she simply asked if he could come by for coffee under the excuse of checking something in the garage. Each visit left him with more questions than answers. Was she just lonely, reaching out for company? Or was there something deeper forming between them? One afternoon, as he tightened a bolt on her back gate, she stood nearby, watching. Then, almost out of nowhere, she said softly, "Do you ever feel like life puts people in your path for a reason?" He looked up, caught off guard. "Maybe. I guess it happens sometimes." She nodded, her gaze steady. "I feel that way about you." The words landed in his chest like a weight he wasn't prepared for. He wasn't used to people speaking to him like that. Most days, his world was about tools, wires, ladders, and long drives from one job to the next. But here was someone telling him he mattered, not for the work he did, but for who he was. Later that evening, as he sat alone in his small apartment, he replayed her words in his mind. It was strange, unsettling, but also comforting. For so long, his life had been about routines and responsibilities, with little space for anything else. Yet suddenly, there was this unexpected connection growing between him and a woman who had started as just another client. The following week, she invited him to stay for dinner after fixing a broken cabinet door. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple meal she had cooked herself. But the atmosphere was different. The conversation flowed more easily now, and the silences between them were no longer awkward, but peaceful. At one point, she leaned across the table slightly and said, "I'm glad you don't rush off like others do. Most people never stay long enough to share a meal or a real conversation." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's not about rushing. Sometimes it's about being present." Her face softened at his words, and for a brief moment, they both sat there in quiet understanding. From then on, their bond deepened in small, almost unnoticed ways. She would ask about his day, his family, his dreams, things no client had ever cared about before. And he found himself opening up more than he expected, sharing little pieces of his life that he usually kept hidden. But with every growing step, there was also a quiet question building inside him. Where was this leading? Was it simply friendship? Or was it moving towards something neither? The days that followed carried a quiet rhythm. He would finish his regular work during the day, houses, offices, small repair jobs, and almost every evening his mind wandered back to her home, to the warm light of her living room and the gentle way she spoke to him. He hadn't expected his life to change this way. For years, his routine had been predictable. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. But now, even the simplest things, like hearing his phone buzz with her name on the screen, made him pause and smile. It was as though the walls of his quiet, ordinary world had opened up to something bigger. One evening she called him not for a repair, but just to talk. Her voice sounded different, a little softer, a little more vulnerable. "I hope it's not too much trouble," she said. "But would you mind coming over? I don't want to be alone tonight." There was no hesitation in his answer. "I'll be there." When he arrived, she greeted him at the door with a look of relief. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that carried a heaviness, as though she had been waiting for someone to break it. They sat in the living room with cups of tea between them. She didn't speak right away, but after a while, she began to share pieces of her life that she had never mentioned before. She spoke about losing people she loved, about the loneliness that had followed, about how she sometimes felt like the walls of the house were closing in on her. "I know it sounds strange," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "But when you're here, it feels lighter, like I can breathe again." Her words touched him more deeply than she could have imagined. He wasn't used to people depending on him for anything other than fixing things. And now here she was, telling him that his presence gave her comfort. "I don't think it's strange at all," he said gently. "Sometimes all we need is someone to remind us that we're not alone." She looked up then, her eyes shining, and for a long moment, they just sat there. The silence between them filled with understanding rather than emptiness. As the night went on, their conversation shifted from heavy memories to lighter things. They laughed about small details of daily life, shared stories about the places they had been, and even made jokes about the broken garage light that had started everything. By the time he left that night, something had changed between them. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, a closeness that neither of them could deny. In the days that followed, their bond only grew stronger. He began to notice the little things she did, the way she always made sure his tea was just the way he liked it, the way she listened with genuine interest when he talked about his work, the way she smiled when he laughed. And she noticed things about him too, the patience in his hands when he worked, the kindness in his voice when he spoke, the way his presence filled the room with a sense of safety. But with that closeness came questions neither of them knew how to answer. Was this friendship? Was it something more? And if it was more, what would it mean for their lives? One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, she finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Do you ever wonder why our paths crossed the way they did?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment before replying. "I don't think everything needs a reason. Some things just happen. And maybe that's enough. She smiled faintly, but her eyes held a deeper emotion, as if she wanted to say something more but wasn't ready. It was during those weeks that he began to feel a shift in himself, too. He had always lived quietly, never expecting much beyond his daily work. But now, he found himself dreaming again, dreaming of possibilities, of a life where connection and companionship could exist alongside responsibility. Still, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, lying in bed, he sometimes wondered if he was imagining things. Maybe she was just being kind, just reaching out because she was lonely. Maybe he was reading too much into her words, her looks, her gestures. But then he would remember the way she held his gaze when she said he was important to her, or the way she asked him to stay when he was about to leave, and those doubts would soften. One evening, as he finished fixing a loose step on her porch, she came out with 2 glasses of water. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and for a moment, everything felt still. "You've done so much for me," she said, handing him a glass. "Not just the repairs. More than that. You've given me back a sense of hope." Her words caught him off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. But then, quietly, he replied, "You've given me something too. Something I didn't know I was missing." The air between them seemed to shift again, heavier with unspoken feelings. She looked at him as though she wanted to say more, but instead she just smiled, and they stood there. The following weeks felt like the turning of a new chapter in both of their lives. The unspoken bond that had been building was now too obvious to ignore. Neither of them had said it out loud, but their actions told the story clearly. He came by her house often, sometimes for repairs, sometimes for tea, and sometimes for no reason at all, just to sit with her, talk, and share the silence. She welcomed him every time with a smile that warmed the space, and he noticed how her once quiet home had begun to feel alive again. The garden was no longer neglected. She started taking care of it, knowing he would join her there to drink tea in the evenings. The rooms, which once carried only stillness, now echoed with laughter, small conversations, and the comfort of shared company. But beneath the calm, there was still something unsettled in both of their hearts. One evening, as they sat across from each other in her living room, she leaned forward slightly and asked, "Do you ever think about us?" The question hung in the air. He didn't answer right away. His mind raced, but his heart already knew the truth. "Yes," he finally admitted. "Every day." Her eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed relieved, but then a shadow of worry crossed her face. "I do too," she whispered. "But I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked gently. "Of what people will think, of how different our lives are. You fix things with your hands, you live so simply, and my world has always been about appearances. I don't know how this would work." He stayed quiet for a moment, letting her words settle. Then he spoke with honesty that came straight from his heart. "Maybe we don't need to have it all figured out right now. All I know is that when I'm here with you, it feels right, and I think that's worth holding on to." Her lips curved into a small smile, though her eyes glistened with emotion. She reached across the table, placing her hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it carried more meaning than words ever could. From that night forward, something shifted. They stopped tiptoeing around their feelings. While they still moved carefully, their closeness became more open. He stayed later into the evenings, sometimes helping her cook dinner, other times just sitting on the porch as they watched the night sky. She began introducing him to more parts of her life, old family photos, favorite books, small traditions she had kept to herself for years. One Saturday afternoon, she invited him to join her on a walk through the park. The sun was bright, children played in the distance, and for the first time, they weren't just 2 people in her home. They were out in the open, together. As they walked, people glanced at them, but she held her head high, and he walked beside her with quiet confidence. He didn't miss the looks, nor did she, but neither let it shake them. It was a silent decision between them. Their connection mattered more than the whispers of strangers. Later that evening, sitting back in her home, she confessed, "You know, I used to worry so much about what people thought of me. Every decision I made was shaped by that fear. But with you, it's different. You remind me what really matters." He smiled, his voice steady. "And you remind me that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined. You see me in a way no one else has." Their lives slowly wove together in a way that felt natural. She began finding joy in the simple things he brought into her world, like fixing the squeaky chair she had always ignored, or teaching her how to plant herbs in the garden. In return, she opened his eyes to things he had never experienced, like visiting an art gallery or trying dishes he'd never heard of. They grew together, not by erasing their differences, but by embracing them. Yet even as happiness blossomed, doubts sometimes crept in. One night, she confessed her deepest fear. "What if this doesn't last? What if one day you regret being here with me?" He looked at her with quiet determination. "The only thing I'd regret is not trying. Life is too short to let fear decide for us." His words settled into her heart like an anchor, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Time passed, and what started with a broken garage light had now turned into something neither of them could have predicted, a partnership built on trust, kindness, and love that grew stronger with every day. One evening, as they sat in the garden with the smell of fresh flowers in the air, she turned to him with a shy smile. "You know," she said, "that first day you came here, when I told you that you were handsome, I didn't realize how much those words would change my life." He chuckled softly, "And I didn't realize fixing a light would bring me more than any paycheck ever could." They both laughed, but beneath the laughter was a shared truth. Fate had brought them together in the most unexpected way, and neither of them wanted to let